Webstudio CMS is here. Whether you want to create a simple blog or a complex portal and bring in data from multiple backends, Webstudio can handle it with ease. In this video, we're going to be building a blog within Webstudio and connecting it to a headless CMS called Hygraph. In order to do that, we are first going to create a dynamic page. So basically a page that is going to swap out its information depending on which blog post we are viewing. Then we're going to set up the headless CMS. We're going to be using Hygraph for this video. After that, we're going to fetch the data within Webstudio, but get the data from Hygraph. After that, we are going to take that data and bind it or connect it to the various components within Webstudio. So taking maybe the blog title and connecting it to the header component. Next, we're going to create a blog overview page. So that way our users can browse a list of all of our blog posts and click through them. And finally, we are going to create a sitemap that includes the data from the dynamic CMS or the headless CMS. Now, real quick, Webstudio CMS is the ability to connect to any HTTP API in the world, so basically any headless CMS in many databases, bring that data in and connect that data to the various components within Webstudio. Now, if none of this makes sense, don't worry, we are going to break it down step by step. Starting off with creating a dynamic page, let's jump into Webstudio. So right here, I have this post page. It's a regular page with a URL, but let's make this dynamic. I'm going to take this part of the URL and just add some dynamic component or piece to it, and it's going to be slug. Slug is going to represent whatever's in the URL, so it's going to be the blog post slug. Depending on the one that's running, is going to change the content that's on the page. And just like that, we have made a dynamic page. Let's check that off and move on to setting up the headless CMS. For headless CMS, we are going to use Hygraph in this video and head over to the dashboard. Down here, there is a basic blog template. Let's grab this and keep all of the defaults, including template content, so we have some data to work with. I'm also going to select Germany for the region, just in case I have some data regulations I need to comply with. Once we're in here, we can see that there are very generous limits on the free tier, but I want to head over to the content and see that we have several posts already to go. And just like that, we have set up the headless CMS. Next, we need to get the data or fetch the data that exists in that headless CMS and bring it into Webstudio. So let's head over to our post page, our dynamic page, and up on the body, we're going to create a new variable. This variable is going to be of type GraphQL. GraphQL is basically the same thing as resource, except it's specially configured to have fields that are specific to GraphQL. And if this doesn't make sense to you yet, no worries, we're going to break it down step by step. We're going to give this a name. Let's just call this post data. And we need a URL. I'm going to head over to Hygraph. In project settings and in endpoints, there's this high performance content API. This URL is where our data will be located. Now we need to ask Hygraph for specific data. That's going to be our query. We're going to head over to the API playground. And in here is going to be a very handy tool that we don't need to know how to use GraphQL or write queries. We can click it together. So I'm going to create a new query and just give this a name so I can recognize it later and call it post. I'm going to collapse assets here and I'm going to expand post. We want to get a post. What do we want from that post? Well, I want the title, I want the slug, I want the, let's see here, the excerpt of it when it was published. Let's grab the cover image. This will expand and this has its own set of fields. Let's grab the alt text, the height, the URL, and the width. Let's grab the content, and it's important that we grab this rich text in HTML format, and then the author. In here, we can grab their biography, their name, and their picture. Again, within the image, we're going to grab the alt text, the height, the URL, and width. That's pretty standard for getting information about images. I think that's all the information we need from the post. I could be missing something, so we could always edit this later. But there's one more thing we need to do. This is asking for a specific post, but we're not asking it for a certain post yet. We need to tell it which post do we want. The thing is, we want a post that matches a certain slug. We don't know what that slug is yet because it's going to be dependent on whatever is in that dynamic part of the URL we defined before. So we're going to select this $, which makes it a variable. To test this out, on the bottom, we can expand the query variables, and I'm going to put some brackets in here and type in slug, and then I need to give it a slug. Let's head over to content and grab one of these to just test out this query. Head over to API Playground, and we are going to put this in quotes. And now that we've got this, let's click play. we can see our post data. We've got the title right here, the slug is this, and we've got all the data right here. All right, now we've got our query. Let's take this, copy it, and head over to Webstudio and paste it in the query exactly as it is. We don't need to change it. Next up, we need to get the variables. Well, we just defined that here, kind of, and paste this in. Now, if we were to leave it just like this, it would always be getting this slug. We don't want that. We want it to change out depending on the URL we're viewing. So I'm actually going to undo that and open the expression editor by clicking this plus sign. In the expression editor, I'm going to paste in what I had before, but change it up a bit. I'm going to get rid of this static value, and we need to make it dynamic. We can see above that there's this system variable available. I'm going to start typing that in and click dot or period to see the child components or elements or keys in it. And there is a param. So I'm going to select params and then keep going until I get to my slug. So the slug is exactly what I defined in the dynamic part of the URL. If I called that ASDF, that would be called ASDF here. And in slug, this is actually just some regular JavaScript right now. So I'm going to get rid of this quote and this quote. All right, we have put together our query and I think we're good to go. So I'm going to click out of here and see what happens. If I inspect this, we've got some data. Now, we actually have the data because before what I did was I took this slug and in here, I pasted it in. So this is going to represent the URL that we're looking at. And so this value is getting passed into our query. And now we're getting the data that is exactly what we were seeing within Hygraph. So we've effectively fetched the CMS data. Moving on, we need to now bind that data or connect the various data pieces we've seen to the components within Webstudio. So we can see that in here it goes data, data, post, and then title, slug, excerpt. And so we need to take all of these and map them to our components. Let's close out of this, and I want to add a header. We don't have a header on my page yet. So I'm going to go to components and add a header. We'll drag this to the top, and I want to give this some styles. So let's say we want our color primary token, and I want this to be my text or my title huge. All right, that looks good. Now let's actually bind the data by heading over to settings, text content, and click this plus. We have this new variable called post data. This is the one we created. And now we're going to use that method of drilling down into the data. We got our post, and then in here, I'm going to look for my title, and there it is. We select that, and now this title is coming from Hygraph. So let's continue on binding data and grab our excerpt next. Same thing, we're going to grab the post data, post, excerpt. And to make this easy, I'm actually just going to copy this part so it's easier to do this for the next one. For image, we're going to bind 4 different fields. First, we need to get the URL. So we're going to go in here and do coverimage.url. And now we need to do the width, height, and alt. Oh, but the alt text wasn't defined in Hygraph. So let's fix this by creating a fallback value. Let's go in the expression editor and do a double pipe, which kind of means like fall back to this value if the first thing doesn't exist, and say no alt text found. Now in reality, go set the alt text. You don't actually want to create some generic alt text, but we can see no alt text found here. Or to take this a step further, I might say, you know what, hide the image altogether if there's no alt text. We're going to go up to the show field, paste in our value, and this time we're going to do a question mark and then say true. And this means that if the first value exists, just output true, and then colon false. If it doesn't exist, print out false. And that means this will be either on or off or true or false. And we can see that it's hidden altogether. Now this is called a ternary operator. It's in JavaScript, so this is nothing unique to Webstudio. For now, I'm going to get rid of that binding and show the image. We're also going to bring in the author data. What's really cool about this is that the author data existed in a different model in Hygraph. So we can see that author is a different model, but using the query, we were able to use relational data in one go here. So we're going to grab the post data, and let's see if I have this. There we go. And in the author, we have all the information we want here, such as the name. So I'm going to continue in mapping the author information. Okay, now that we have the author information mapped, I need to add a new component, which is the date. We have a special component for date to handle all different kinds of date formats. So we're going to grab the published at date, and we'll see that it's kind of in an ugly format right now, which is very normal for storing the information. But to display it for humans, we're going to change it to be our language, our country, whatever it wants, whatever you want to be here, and change the style. So I like going medium. You can display the time as well, but for a post, I don't think we need that. And so now we've got our date component set up. Now there's one more component I want to set up with you, which is the rich text. This is going to be the content embed component. Let's start by mapping the rich text or the HTML to this component by going to our post data and grabbing that HTML. There we have it. Now I want to style these headers and these links, but if I click on them, I can't really get into it because I'm in the content embed, unlike over here where I can go to the style panel and style this individual component out. But with content embed, this is a special one. This is really cool. You can open up the content embed and you have all the different tags you are able to style within the HTML. So for our H2s, let's click on heading 2, and I want to apply my heading 2 token, and let's grab that color primary 500 again, and there we go. And I also want to style out my links by giving it my button link token, and now we have a nice hover effect over our links. And we can continue doing this for all of the different tags on the navigator. Making a change to one of the tags will affect any instance of that tag contained within the HTML. Okay, we are done binding on the page, but there's one more place we need to go, which is the page settings. Let's open up page settings, and it's important that we add a title, a description, and an image. So for search engines or for social media or when you're texting somebody, this information is going to show up. So what's really cool about Webstudio is that you're able to bind on any field and component within the platform, including languages, so you can provide localized content. Let's grab an image. For this, we just need the URL, and now we have our social share image. And lastly, we need to map a status code. So currently, it's going to say 200, which just means this post exists. But what if we type in some gibberish in the URL? Well, we want it to return a 404 saying it's not found. We're going to go to the expression editor, and we need to come up with something that if it doesn't exist, that's when it's going to be a 404. So what I like to do is just say if the slug doesn't exist, because we need a slug, we know that that's what the mandatory piece is in the URL. Then we're going to use what we learned before, question mark. So if it's true, 200, colon, if it's false, 404. And we'll see it prints out 200. And to test this, let's go up to the currently viewed slug, add a character to it, and we'll see that it goes 404. And go back, and we're back to a 200. We have effectively bound this external data with Webstudio components, mapping the various pieces of content to the respective components and fields in Webstudio. So now we can check that off and move on to creating a blog overview. And congrats, we've built a dynamic page. The blog overview page isn't going to be dynamic in the sense that the URL is going to change out, but we just want to list all of our different blog posts here. So what we're going to do is create a new variable just like we did before, and we'll call this posts. We're going to use GraphQL again and grab that URL that was in Hygraph. And for a query, we need to create a new one, pretty similar to what we already did, but a bit more streamlined. And in here, I want to grab posts, plural. So this is going to get all the different posts, and I want to grab the different fields. So we want a slug so we can click on it, a title, and that cover image, always grabbing the alt text, the height, the width, and the URL. And I also want to add a sort so that there's a consistent order when people go to the page. And so I'm going to click order by and do published at descending so the newest posts show up first. All right, I think that's everything. I'm going to click play here to see what I've got. I think this is good. Let's grab this, paste it into the query. No variables because there's no dynamic piece to this, and we're good to go. Let's inspect, and we can see the same thing we were seeing in Hygraph, which is great. All right, so I have a card right here, and I want this card to be duplicated for every different post there is. The way we're going to do that is by adding a collection. The collection component will run an iteration or iterate over each piece of data and duplicate whatever it is that you put in it. So for the data component, we are going to grab our posts and bind the individual post or the list of posts to this component. Now, as soon as I get to the numbers, if I were to select 0 or 1, that would only display the first or second one. I don't want that, so I'm just going to backspace and grab all posts. And let's give this variable, this default collection item variable, a name and call it post item. We can see that In collection, there are 2 boxes because there are 2 posts, but I actually don't want to use those boxes. I want to use my content card, which I'm going to drag in. And you'll notice that it gives me 2 different ones. Any changes I make to one of them will duplicate to all of them. So if I drag the heading up, you can see it drags up right there, but let's put the image back up top. Now we need to bind the various data points to this component. So just like we were doing before, except we're going to be using post item now, let's grab the title, the image URL, the width, the height, and the alt text. Lastly, I need to bind the link so that when you click on these, it actually goes somewhere. We're going to use the expression editor for this, per usual, and grab the slug. Now, if we do this, it's only going to print out the slug. We need to print out the posts portion of the URL before. So in quotes, I'm going to do posts slash, and then do a plus sign, which is basically going to concatenate or glue them together. And now we can see that it prints slash posts. All right, and let's test this out. We've got content federation, and we really need a navigation, but for right now, I'll just go back to posts and select this one. Now we've got create a learning title here. So we've got our dynamic data swapping in and out, and this all happens super fast. All right, we've created a blog overview. The last step is to create a sitemap. So if we go back to Webstudio, Webstudio automatically creates a sitemap for static pages such as home or about. But for this dynamic page, all of the different variations of the URL exist in Hygraph or headless CMS. So we need to bring that data in and create a sitemap. And I'm going to show you how to do that. We're going to create a new page and we'll call it sitemap. We're going to give it a path of sitemap.xml. As soon as we do this exact path, it's going to override the existing sitemap that Webstudio automatically outputs. And we're going to change the document type to XML. And you'll notice all this other stuff will gray out because it's not needed for XML. Now we need to assemble a sitemap, but I actually don't have like the exact wireframe of a sitemap in my head. It's not memorized. But good news is we can go to the marketplace, head over to pages, and click on CMS sitemap and insert this sitemap. If we go to the navigator, we'll see that we have 2 collections with the various components needed for building a sitemap. Let's start with dynamic. On this one, I'm going to create a new variable directly on the collection and call this posts. And we're going to set this up similar to how we have been doing already by grabbing that URL and coming up with a new query, but not very different from the one we already did. I'm just going to edit this directly in here. We could just uncheck things on the left, and I need the slug. And I also want the updated at time so we can inform Google the last time that there were edits. And I'm going to keep the sort so that there's just like a consistent sort on the page. We're going to copy this, paste it in the query, no variables, there's no dynamic component to this right now. And we're going to close out of it, inspect, and we have our 2 posts. Let's take that data and map it to our collection like we did on the post overview page. And as soon as we get to the numbers, backspace, and you'll see it'll automatically output 2 of them. And we just need to map those URLs to the locations, and we already named this dynamic item, so we are good to go. That came from the template. Let's grab the slug, and then in the start of this, we need to put our URL, and then I'm going to do the slash posts, and then plus the slug. We could also get our URL actually from the system variable. It exists in there. We'll just do this for now. And we've got the last mod. Let's grab this and do the updated at time. Perfect. Now for our static items, we can already see that they're populated, and this is because there is a resource of type system resource. So instead of, or variable of type system resource. So instead of GraphQL, it's system resource, and then sitemap automatically brings in the static sitemap information, and it's already mapped. The only thing we need to do is add the URL. And this will probably change in the future because I will update the marketplace item to include the URL by default. All right, now we have our sitemap. Oh, and I just noticed in my dynamic sitemap for the location, I did not put a trailing slash. And now we've got one. We are good to go. We've built a dynamic sitemap that is pulling in data from the headless CMS, not using code, but being able to do this with the same flexibility and power as the rest of the platform. Let's check that off. So together, we've built a front end for a headless CMS using no code, completely through the visual editor. We started off by creating a dynamic page so that no matter what URL we're viewing, the information will swap out, and we only have to maintain one blog post, so that way it's highly maintainable for design. Next, we set up Hygraph as a headless CMS, but again, Webstudio can connect with any HTTP API. We fetch the data from that remote resource, and then we bound the data or map the data from that external resource to the various components within Webstudio. After that, we created a blog overview displaying a list of all of the blog posts so users can navigate them. And then we created a dynamic sitemap so search engines can browse the website. Now, whether you want to create a simple blog or something more complex, these core components are going to be used in both use cases. You can even bring in multiple CMSs or multiple backends and bring them together under one cohesive roof. Well, I hope you build something really cool with Webstudio CMS. It's incredibly powerful and flexible and very fast. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.